Hello everyone. We welcome you all to Intuitive Cloud's Cybersecurity Awareness Month. At Intuitive, we thrive in a dynamic, high growth environment where every individual is empowered to unleash their full potential. Continuous learning and robust security reinforcement are at the heart of the organization. This month, we are driving several initiatives like quizzes, newsletters, security bites, webinars, and more to foster a culture of security and knowledge. Our facility and team uphold rigorous security compliance certified by ISO 27001 and SOC 2 Type 2 for the last consecutive 4 years. We are happy and proud to share that. And our CEO is a visionary leader with a deep commitment to fostering innovation and security within our organization. Under his leadership, Intuitive Cloud has achieved remarkable growth and success. And our leaders, Indrajil Shah, Mead, Troy, and all the executive leaders have been instrumental in shaping the organization to what it is today for the last 12 years. And today, we are excited to have a special session on risk and challenges in generative AI. Our speaker for this session is a distinguished expert in the field of AI and machine learning. So I would like to request you all to join me in welcoming Praveen Jayakumar, the head of AML Solutions Architecture at AWS India. Praveen has an impressive 28 years of experience in architecture, design, development, and consulting across multiple business verticals such as banking, financial, financial services, information, media, and retail. He leads the machine learning solutions architecture team for AWS India. Praveen holds a bachelor's degree in engineering from University of Madras and an MS from BITS Pilani. And in today's session, Praveen will provide a high-level introduction to generative AI. He's going to discuss some of the risks and challenges that exist today, and he will explain why AWS is the right choice for generative AI. That is, why AWS is the right choice for generative AI security specifically. He will also share some of the frameworks to help you begin your generative AI adoption journey. And he's going to cover a couple of use cases for us from generative AI security perspective. And with further ado, let's welcome Praveen Jayakumar. Praveen, over to you, all yours, and looking forward to hear from you.
Thanks, Verna. Thank you for inviting me, and thanks for Intuitive Cloud. So let me share my screen. Just give me 1 second. Can Yeah. So thanks everyone for joining. So as Bona mentioned today, we'll talk about some of the risks and challenges in generative AI, developing generative AI applications, and using some of the generative AI models. What are the risks and challenges that you come across, right? So for this, let's talk about generative AI itself, right? To begin with, November 2023 is when ChatGPT kind of released, right? So that was probably a defining moment for generative AI. So a lot of people kind of first started hearing those words, right? So generative AI models, LLMs, large language models. So a lot of these words we started hearing it, and people really started seeing the potential of generative AI. But if you've been in this field for some time, and if you've been observing, there are a lot of other companies who also work in that area, in that large language model area. And then what does generative AI kind of brings in, right? First of all, creativity. You could generate new content, be it images, video, audio. You'll be able to do it, right? Again, there are a lot of interesting use cases that we are seeing currently for improving the productivity, right? Be it a call center agent productivity or a field agent productivity. There are numerous use cases that we kind of start seeing with generative AI, and then again it brings in a completely new way to connect audience, basically, right? Engage audience. Again, personalization is again one of the interesting use cases that you would see with generative AI itself, right? So, so what's so different about generative AI, right? I mean, we have been hearing about machine learning, artificial intelligence over a period of time. So, what's the big difference, right? So, the big difference is about the foundation models, right? So, these are really, really large models that is available. That is what we are calling it as LLM, large language models, is what it is. So, what people have done is that I think in about 2007 or the time frame, there was this architecture from Google. There was a paper that was released. Attention is all you need, and they brought in this new concept called transformers, right? And all the language models that you see now is based on the transformer models. Transformer, it uses that particular architecture. So what they do it is that they collect large amount of data and then train a machine learning model which is really large. When we say large, what we mean by is that the number of parameters, or people call that as a weights, that is there in a network, in a neuron network that they call. So there's just a large number of weights over there. So what is so different from a traditional machine learning model, right? In a traditional machine learning model, what we do it is that, let's say if I want to summarize a large text, there is a 30-page PDF, I wanted to summarize into a concise 1,000 words or 2,000 words. Let's say that that's the problem statement that you're trying to solve. Traditionally, what we would have done is that we would have gone ahead and collected these large texts and then summarized text. That's what we called as a labeled data. And then we would have trained a machine learning model, an NLP model that we would have trained, and then we would have started using it for that one specific task, right? So summarization is a task that I'll be using it for one specific task. But with this large language model, what people have realized is that this one model were able to do multiple different tasks, and you don't need to have different models to do it, right? That is the power this large language model can kind of bring in, actually, right? So wide variety of use cases you will be able to address with one single large model, basically, right? So that's what this foundation model kinds of brings in, right? Now let's talk about, since we are interested in security for this session, let's talk about what we call it as a GenAI security scoping matrix. So in that, we kind of see how are the 5 different ways that people are using generative AI now, right? First, scope one, this is the consumer app, right? This is classic chat GPT, right? So there are other things like Midjourney, Party Rock from AWS provides this. Here, there is an UI that is provided to you probably, and then you just ask a question and you get an answer back, right? So you don't need to write anything like a prompt or things like that. Just ask a question and you get an answer back. And that is what we call it as a consumer app, right? That's scope one, right? And then scope two, this is where the generative AI is built into some of the apps that you are using. For example, if you are going to use Salesforce, so Salesforce has this Einstein GPT that is built into it, actually, right? Or if you're using what we call it as our code assistant tool called Code Whisperer, so again, you see that that generative AI is kind of built into it, right? So that is second way that you would be encountering or using Gen AI, basically, right? And then the third way, where models are exposed. For example, you might use the OpenAI model from directly from OpenAI, or through Azure you would be using OpenAI, or in AWS context we provide something called Bedrock, where we provide a collection of models. So there the models are exposed. You make a call to the model, you create something called a prompt. Prompts are nothing but that those are the interfaces to the model. You create a prompt, and then for a specific task that you are doing, you create a prompt, and make a call to that model, and then model responds back, right? So you build your application using these pre-trained models actually, right? So that's the third scope, quite popular. A lot of application developers, a lot of companies use it to develop their own generative AI based applications, basically, right? That's the scope three. And scope four is kind of interesting. This, as I said, in the scope three, the models that you use are basically trained on vast amount of data, internet scale data that is around publicly available data. It is trained on, but then remember that it's not trained on your data, right? Your enterprise data that is residing there, it's not trained on that, right? That is where the scope 4 comes in. So the idea here is that, can I take the model that is used in scope 3, which is a pre-trained model, and can I bring in my own enterprise data that I have? Can I train the model and then make it available for my applications to use actually, right? An example, let's say if I want to use generative AI to do an internal search, basically, right? A search within my intranet that I wanted to do a search, then it needs to understand your own data, the data that might be residing in somewhere in a SharePoint or in a wiki that is inside in your organization. And that is where this concept of fine-tuned models are there, and you could use it actually, right? Scope 5 is a self-trained models. Probably very handful of companies in the world do it. Somebody like a Meta does it for Llama, Anthropic Claude, OpenAI, and then there are few other providers where they actually train the model from a scratch. Very expensive process. People spend millions and millions of dollars to create this model, right? So that's on scope 5. We wouldn't go into that in lot more. We won't go into that in a lot more details for that actually, right? So when you talk about securing this generative AI across all the scopes, you need to have governance and compliance, legal and privacy, risk management, controls. You need to have controls in place, and it has to be resilient, right? So that's what securing your generative AI application means. And we will talk about in each scope, how do you kind of do that actually, right? But before that, before we get into the individual scope, let's understand how a data flows in a generative AI application, right? So in any scope that you take, this is the flow that is going to be. At the bottom, you see that there is a user. User either ask a question. Here we calling it as a prompt, but then think of it, I'm asking a question. And then there is in the part two, there is in the step 2, there is a generative AI application which takes the question, and based on the question, it might decide that, hey, I wanted to use the data that I have, or it might say that, hey, it's okay, I don't want to use the data. It calls the model. We will get into the fine tuning or pre-trained model in a bit, but it calls a model, gets the response back, and gives the response back to the user, right? Quite straightforward. So this is what typically the data kind of flows in a typical generative AI application, right? So some of the common guidance across the scope, right? So if you are in scope 1 or scope 4 or scope 5, what are some of the common guidance that you would see? First one, don't outright ban generative AI technology, right? So this is actually one of the customers that I kind of very closely work with. I'm not sure how many of you are aware, when ChatGPT kind of initially got introduced, there was this big talk about one of the Samsung, I believe it's Samsung. So one of those employees put out the code over there and then started asking questions, and apparently that code became part of the training data actually, right? And so once they heard about it, they just said that, hey, nobody is going to use ChatGPT in our organization, right? They completely outrightly banned. But then that's also not good way to do it, right? Every technology, when it comes in, it has its own positive and negative actually, right? So nobody bans Google, right? I mean, we all use Google. I mean, so in the same way, you will see that generative AI powered search engines and other features, plugins that you would start seeing, banning outright is not typically a good option actually, right? Instead of that, there are a couple of things that you can do. Empower your user, basically create a policies around using generative AI technologies. what can be, which kind of technology can be used, what kind of a questions that they can ask. And as an organization, you could also filter out some of the harmful content and then incorrect content or a PII, personally identifiable content, that kind of goes in. You should be able to block it as well, basically, right? So there are quite a few things as an organization that you should be able to do it. But primarily it is all about empowering the user, educating them on what are the right things to do and what are some of the things that they shouldn't be doing it, right? In the scope, we will cover in a little bit more detail, because every type of application has a different ways the security or regulation kind of implies on that. So we will talk about that in a little bit more details, right? So this is some of the common against all the scope. But now, when it comes into compliance, right? Again, if you see that there are no standards that is there, right? Every country, every region, as you could see, there are about 800 AI policy initiative across 69 different countries that is being currently spoken about, actually, right? If you're following this space, recently there was this law that was passed specifically in California state, which was vetoed by their governor, and things around that happened, right? And then in EU, there are separate policy regulations and other things that is being spoken about, actually, right? So there is no common consensus at this point of time. So every country is kind of thinking through it, and we are still get to see what kind of a regulation that would emerge. As one of the side note, if you, probably most of you might have heard about Meta's Llama model, basically, right? So Llama 3.2 model very recently got launched, and their multi-model capability model, there are some of the biggest models that they have. They didn't release it in EU region, actually, right? Some parts of EU region, they didn't release the model, right? So that's because they weren't very sure about some of the EU Act that is there, and how would that affect when somebody uses the model. So the point I'm trying to make here is that there are still compliance concerns. There is no one law that is currently governing it, and I mean, you see, by end of this year and next year, you will see that there are some laws getting adopted, and we need to see how that would affect certain things, actually, right? So this is an evolving space. That's the point I kind of wanted to make in this slide, actually, right? And from a resiliency perspective, a couple of things that you need to consider. Again, you need to monitor. See, every models comes with a size, what they call it as a size. Context length is what it is referred as. How much of data that you could pass in, and you can get the results back, actually, right? And every model, let's say, for example, if you're using the Meta's Llama model, that would have a size that would be completely different from what you would be using it in, let's say, OpenAI or Anthropic Cloud, right? So you should be aware of it, and you should know how to use it, actually, right? And it's always a good practice to have copy of your prompt and the output that was generated, actually, right? So that you could go at any point of time, do an auditing if there are certain things that was not working out, or what kind of results that came out. If you want to analyze, that's a good practice, kind of do it, right? Other additional consideration you would do with any API calling, right? So you wanted to do things like back off and retries, graceful degradation. All of those regular design principles that you use for software engineering still applies to your generative AI applications as well, right? No big change over there, right? So now let's get into each of these scope, right? And then kind of talk about it in slightly little bit more details. So consumer app, as I said, ChatGPT is an example over here. These are all off-the-shelf app that is provided. A lot of times it could be free as well, but you could also pay a nominal fee to use it. As I said, example, ChatGPT, Perplexity. I mean, if you're in search and if you want to use perplexity.ai, it's another great example of this consumer app that is there, right? On the right hand side, you see that here, really, except for your data, you don't control anything. Most of the times, these providers provide a UI. You ask a question, that application is controlled by the provider, and then the model, underlying model they use, and all of the stuff is controlled by that particular provider, right? You don't really have any say over there, right? So that's what the consumer app here it means, right? And then, so from a governance perspective, what you could do, create a usage guidelines, and then you establish the guidelines around it, and also you could develop compliance monitoring and reporting process around this whole for this particular scope, right? Couple of important things. These treat this prompts when you are using this kind of applications, treat these prompts and output as public, basically, right? That means that it is not anymore private. Treat this as public, that it will be exposed to outside. Treat it that way, right? That mindset would help for this particular scope, right? Don't ever input any PII or confidential information in those kind of, if you're going to use a free type of applications, don't ever use any kind of PII information, right? And then like understand the terms and service policy provided by this particular provider, and also look into how, if you could use this output commercially, right? There are certain applications, the output of the model, output that you get, probably you cannot use it commercially if it is free, actually, right? So you need to understand before you start using it in a serious way. Those kind of apps, you need to really understand the terms and conditions. What are the legal implications of using that output for a commercial purpose? You should be kind of aware of it, right? So again, that is what you need to look into it. Again, like any other third party that you would be using in your organization, if you're going to use a third party, you do your risk management, understand the security responsibility of the third party, of yourself. All of those stuff you need to go through, right? The risk management process that you typically go through by using a third party, you also go through it with this type of applications that is there in the scope, actually, right? And if you're using this kind of application, there are a lot of times they may not have any proper SLAs. They may not give you SLAs. And also, one of the other things with generally with the large language model is the latency part of it, which you should be aware of, right? We, by the name, we call it as a large language model. So what it means is that, as I said, when you say large, there are a lot of large weights that is there. So these models tend to take a slightly longer time to respond back, right? That's the nature of large language models. So you should be aware of it. Let's say if you've configured some kind of a timeout, I've seen that a lot of applications are, I mean, they're let's say the web server is timed out after 30 seconds, basically, right? For if it's a synchronous kind of application. So if you have something like that, then you should consider, see if you want to increase the timeout, if you're using these kind of application underneath your application, right? So those are some of the things that you need to consider, basically, right? So that's on that. Scope one, right? Then let's get into this enterprise app. Enterprise app, typically, as I said, these are applications that get built into some of the common application that you're using, like a Salesforce. If I take AWS example, in AWS, we have this thing called Amazon Code Whisperer, which is a code generation tool. It sits in your development environment. Let's say it could be your Python development environment that you are using. So it kind of sits into that and helps you in your code development, right? You can just say that, hey, give me a code to upload data into S3, right? So it will suggest the code that you could start using it, basically, right? Again, like the first scope, here also, all you do it is that you enter the question, and then you don't control rest of the data, rest of the blocks you don't control over here. It is given by the third party, and you then just start using it, actually, right? And governance and compliance is exactly the same, but the only difference is that the black ones applies to both scope 1 and scope 2. These are some of the new addition, right? You kind of understand how is the data flow, where is your how it is used as a third party service, And then what are the typical regulatory requirements with that, right? You need to understand that when you are going through this governance and compliance, right? Again, on the legal and privacy, there are a couple of things. Data residency is important. Let's say you in this application, the third-party application, you might have data that you could not store it in a different country, a different region. There could be quite a few things based on your application. So you need to understand what is the data residency, where this data is stored, when that enterprise is using it, right? Or the data that moves out of the region. Those are some of the things that you should be aware of. And very, very important point, the last one, even in Amazon Code Whisperer, when you are using, we provide you two different ways. One is a free edition, and other is an enterprise edition. In both, so even in the enterprise edition, there is a way you could basically, when you give a data in Code Whisperer, there is a way that you can say that, hey, don't use my data for any training purpose. You can opt out of it, right? So you should understand if that is a mechanism that is provided by the underlying provider, actually, right? Very, very important to understand. And if you don't want to your data to be used for training data, you could very well opt out of it, right? But first of all, you need to understand if there is a provision like that. If so, if you want to use it, you could decide to use it as well, right? So these are some of the considerations that I'm kind of talking about, actually, right? Risk management is exactly same as what you would have done in scope 1, so I won't kind of go into it. Resilience is against the same, right? Now let's get into the scope 3, which is the pre-trained models that you have. So in pre-trained models, the first thing as an example that I gave is that either you're using the OpenAI's API directly or through Azure, or let's say if you're using Amazon Bedrock models, those are all pre-trained models. These models are trained already by, as I said, vast amount of data, and the models are provided to you basically, right? So there are two different ways which the model providers provide you these APIs. One, they give you pay-per usage basically, right? So if you go to Bedrock and then say that you use a Llama model, you pay only for the amount of data, what we call it as input tokens, and the amount of data that comes out of it, right? So the input and output tokens is the only thing that we charge, right? So that is one model, that is like a pay-per-use model that you have. But then there are second model where you could host the model by yourself. For example, if you take Llama model, Llama models are open weight models, so you can download the weights, and then let's say if you're an AWS shop, you can get a GPU instance, deploy that model from Hugging Face. You can download the model, the weights, and then you could deploy the model and provide that as an API for somebody to consume, actually, right? So you in this case, you are building a generative AI application. Based on generative AI, you are building an application, but then you are using these models from either open source, either something like a prepaid or a pay-per-use model, or you deploy it and use it, actually, right? So this is what that's there in the scope 3, actually, right? Again, one of the things when you in the scope 3 that you need to understand is that understand the data where it is trained, right? And who owns the data, and how well they have cleaned the data while doing the training. Typically, you can get this information from what they call it as a model card. Every model provider provides you something called a model card, which talks about how they have used the data, what are all the things they have done before training to clean the data, clean the bias and things like that, right? You will be able to get the information from what is called as a model card, and that is a good place for you to look into it from a governance perspective, actually, right? And then from a privacy and legal perspective, there are quite a few things that you need to look into it. So how is your, when you're making a call to, let's say you are using like a pay-per-use basically model, right? And what happens to your prompt and what happens to the output? Is that model provider going to store your prompt, going to store your output and use it for the training? Again, a very, very important question to ask, actually, right? And is your data, if you're going to go to the route of pay per use, how is your data going to be shared with other customers actually, right? Again, that's an important question to be asked, because you are going to work in a shared tenancy way basically, right? So there are multiple customers going to make a call into the model. So how is your data going to be used, whether it's going to be shared, is a it's an important question that you have to ask, right? And then again, another very important thing over here is that copyright answers questions basically, right? So the output that you get out of the model, who owns the copyright of that particular output? Whether I as the user owns the copyright, if I'm asking a question and I get an answer back, and who owns the copyright of it, right? Whether me or the model provider, or the from the data source where the model was trained, does guy owns the copyright? You will see that, for example, in the image generation model, right? So you ask a question and say that, hey, I wanted this kind of an image, and the model generates the image. There are a lot of legal cases that is currently going on in US and other parts of the world. Basically, the question is that who owns the copyright, right? So you should be aware of it, and you should also understand what happens if there is a copyright challenge that happens. What is that model provider can take it actually, right? So for example, in Amazon, if you are using, we provide an image model called Titan image generator model, and any copyright claim that happens against you, Amazon will take a responsibility for it, right? That is a written guarantee that we provide. Like that, every model provider has certain guarantees that they provide. But the point I'm making here is that you should understand who owns the copyright. If at all there is a copyright issue that comes up, who will own the responsibility for it, right? Very important to kind of understand that actually, right? Again, risk management. So there are quite a sense, because now in this case, you are creating the prompt, you are making a call to the model basically, right? So there could be a lot of security and risk issues that could come into it. For example, OSAP top 10 for LLMs have been released. One of the things is about prompt injection actually, right? When you are creating a prompt and calling the model, can somebody intercept that prompt and make modification, can do something malicious? That's a real possibility to do it, right? How do you protect it from prompt injection actually, right? And if you are going to give this as a plugin, can this plugin execute some malicious code without you knowing it? Again, that is one of the top vulnerability that is currently there actually, right? So you should take care when you are using, when you are developing application using these models. These are some of the things that you should be taking care. Having said that, it's not that I'm kind of giving a like a trying to frighten you or something like that. These kind of even if you develop any application, you go through it, right? I mean, OSAP for applications is also there. Security for any application that is there, right? It's similar that, but you just that this is an evolving field, and the point I'm trying to make here is that you should be aware of it actually, right? So that's what I'm trying to kind of bring it over here. Again, from a controls perspective, you should in your organization, you should be aware of who can use what kind of a foundation models, and who has access to those models basically, right? And then again, you use WAF or DLP to filter malicious or sensitive inputs basically, right? That is typically like what we do with other application. You continue doing it actually, right? Again, from a resilience perspective for scope 3, as I said, I mean, basically you have self-hosted models. If you're hosting the models by yourself, then again, be very flexible on the type of compute that you're using, right? One of the reasons is that currently, if you see, there is a huge shortage. Now it has been relatively better, but there's been a huge shortage of GPU capacity actually, right? A lot of times you run out of capacity. So the question now is that if you want to scale, if you're stuck with one type of GPU, Is it a good way? Probably not. So be flexible on that is the point that is being made over here actually, right? So those are some of the resiliency that you should be taking care of it actually, right? Scope 4, again, this is where what you do it is that what fine tuning. So you have this pre-trained model, right? In the last thing we spoke about the pre-trained model that is there, and what you do it is that we typically model providers or providers like Amazon, who is a bedrock providers. What they do it is that they give you an ability to fine tune your model. Basically, you can take this pre-trained model, bring in your own data, and then you actually use a GPU to train this model. You don't need to train all of those parameters because it will be a very expensive process. You train only few of those parameters. There are different technologies like PEFT, LoRa, and other things. Today we won't go into that, but using the technology, you train the model. Now you have a model that is very, very specific to your use case, basically, right? Because it understands your data, right? That is what we call it as a fine-tuned model. And a lot of our customers, we now see these days that from a pre-trained models, now they are kind of experimenting in using these fine-tuned models as well, actually, right? Again, you one very, very important thing with fine-tuned models is that you are bringing in your data and then moving it into the model. The information now moves into the model. So all the data classification rules that you would have applied now applies to your model as well, right? Because it has information about your kind of data now, actually, right? So all the data classification rules that applies to it. Another very, very important thing is that don't use PII data to train a model, actually, right? To fine tune the model, because currently, let's say, if you want to make the model unlearn something, there is no technology available. If there is a data that is gone in already, and let's say if you are into this GDPR and other things like that, where you want to model to unlearn something or somebody's data, that is not at all possible to do it at the technology that we have now, right? So a good practice here is that never use PII data to train your model, actually, right? So that's again one of the best practices that is being told about the fine tuning aspects of it, actually, right? Again, in the risk management, we spoke about OSAP top 10 things, and then there are other things that is very, very specific to fine-tuned models. Something like a train data poisoning is nothing but if you give in a garbage data or if you give in a malicious data, then there is a very good chance that you are training the model with a malicious data. So the response will also be like that, basically, right? Again, those are some of the things that you should be aware of it, actually, right? I wouldn't go into self-trained models because, as I said, there are only very few people in the world who actually do the training from grounds up, and it's like a very, very, very expensive process. It's probably cost you a few $1 million to do it. So I'm not going to go into those aspects of it, actually, right? So just shifting gear, you'll see that these are all the top 10 OSAP. I mean, from a large language model, these are the ones that has been told. We won't go through each and every one of it, right? But then there are certain things that is just not technical measures. For example, if I take that ninth one, right, over reliance, right? So the point there is being made is that you shouldn't be over reliant on large language models. There should be a human in the loop, basically, that you should kind of bring it in for certain type of critical application, right? So not all of it that you see here you could solve it our technical, but there are other aspects of it that you should be aware of it as well, right? Probably this is a separate topic that we can do it on about the entire the security as just part of the security aspect we could do it. But just the point I want to make is that is just more than technical that you should be aware of it, actually, right? So let's jump now, and then we'll talk about how AWS is seeing the generative AI stack, basically, right? So we kind of classify that into three different layers. The bottommost layer is the infrastructure layer. That is where we provide you right from NVIDIA instance to our own instance for training and deployment called Trainium and Inferentia, for you to either train your model, host your model, or fine tune the model. You could we provide different features over there. The second level is where you use the models that we provide to create your applications, basically, right? So Bedrock is a service that we provide. It's a complete managed API that we provide that you will be able to use it. It's just not about the model. Things around, hey, how do you secure your application? The concept called guardrails, and then agentic workflows is something that is kind of picking up these days. All of those stuff is provided as part of Bedrock, but predominantly helping you to build your application that has generative AI capabilities, basically, right? So that's what Bedrock is about. And then the top layer that you see over there, we have used large language models to create applications, right? So if you know QuickSight, it's our visualization dashboard that's been around for some time. Now we have brought in a capability where you can just say that, hey, this is the kind of chart I want. In a natural language, you can tell it, instead of writing a SQL query, then Amazon Q QuickSight can understand it, generate that visualization for you. You don't need to understand querying and things like that, right? So that's the layer that we are trying to build. You will start seeing that we will be adding a lot more components as we kind of go along, actually, right? So this is how we kind of mentally think about generative AI. And now we will talk about, for probably the next 10 minutes, we will talk about Bedrock, what Bedrock kinds of brings in from a security perspective, right? So just to level set, what is Bedrock? As I said, in a single API, we give you choice of different foundation models that you will be able to consume, actually, right? We provide you an ability to customize your model. And then there's one very famous design pattern to use to use large language model. It's called as RAG, retrieval augmented generation. Bedrock makes it very, very easy for you to do that. Actually, we have this feature called knowledge base. Through that, you could use it. And then in the last 6 or 7 months, there is this whole concept about agents, large language model agents that has come up, and Bedrock provides you an agent capability for you to do this agentic workflows. It's a separate topic by itself, how what is agents and how you could automate a lot of your task. That is the power that agents kinds of brings in. Again, Bedrock provides you security, privacy, and safety, right? So these are all the models that Bedrock provides. So we have partnered with multiple model providers, including AI21 Labs, Anthropic, Cohere, Meta, Mistral, Stability AI, and they have provided their various different models. And Amazon, we also have our own models called Titan set of models that we make it available, actually, right? For example, Meta very recently launched their Llama 3.2, and the day that was launched, we had it available in Bedrock, actually, right? Same with Anthropic. Their very powerful model at this point of time is a Claude 3.5 Sonnet model. The day it was launched, it was available in Bedrock. So in a single API call, you will be able to access all of these models in pay-per-use mode, actually, right? You will be paying only for whatever you are going to use based on the input and token. Output tokens is what we are going to be charged for, actually, right? One of the common questions that we get asked is around security. Okay, just before that, Bedrock also provides you way to fine tune your model. As I said, one of the big things is that these models are trained on large data, but not on your data. So you want the ability to do a fine tuning or continuously pre-train the model. Again, Bedrock makes it very, very easy for you to do it. We call it as a complete managed training capability that we kind of provide with Bedrock, actually, right? On the data privacy and protection, these are some of the very important things to understand. You are always in control of your data. Your data is, we partner with multiple different model providers, as I showed you, right? For example, Anthropic, Llama, but we give you a guarantee that we don't share any of your data with any of these third-party model providers, actually, right? So your data is not shared with any of them. All your prompts, all the outputs, or even if you fine tune a model, basically those remains within your region. It doesn't go out of, you can select a region where you want to do it. It stays over there. And basically we also don't store any of your input prompts or output, that we don't store it anywhere, actually, right? Very, very important to understand that, right? And your data is always encrypted both in transit and rest, right? Typically most of our services do, and Bedrock also does that, actually, right? All your, if you are fine tuning the model, then the model has your own, I said that your knowledge is baked into the model as weights, right? You could bring in, using your KMS key, you could bring in your key and you'll be able to encrypt it, right? Again, that option is available. We provide identity management. You can control who can call the model, what type of a model. All of those features are kind of built in within Bedrock using the IAM controls that's available. From a governance and auditability support, you will be able to track your usage metrics in CloudWatch. And then if you want, if you it's if you want, you can enable a flag. Well, and that flag, what it will do, it is that it will copy all your inputs and output, the number of input tokens, the number of output tokens, and the latency in your own S3 bucket. You will be able to store it, actually, right? Again, so that's the feature that is available. You, if you want for auditing purpose, you will be able to enable the flag. Again, it is not stored on the AWS side, like the AWS accounts, but in your own account, it is kind of stored over there, actually, right? And a lot of the compliance standard that you see, you could kind of see it over here, right? So one another feature that Bedrock kind of provides is that we have two types of ways you could access Bedrock. One is on demand. As I said, we charge you for the input tokens and the output tokens, right? And then there is another way that you can buy a capacity from us, actually, right? From Bedrock, you can buy a capacity, and then you could use the capacity. If you have a lot of usage, provision capacity is a way to go, actually, right? I mean, if you have been using AWS, if you have used the reserved instance, it's something similar to that, actually, right? But there are certain differences. In on demand, basically it's a multi-tenant architecture, right? So I might be calling that API, you might be calling that API. All of it will be served by AWS, and it could be served out of a single machine, actually, right? So the deployment is available to all the customers, whereas when you buy a provisioned capacity, that capacity you provision and only it is available for your particular account or that particular customer, it is available, actually, right? And then again, so from a model perspective, if you want, here there is a, in the provision capacity, there is a copy of the model that is there, and that is what it gets used, right? For even for fine tuning and other things, provision capacity is the way to go, actually, right? So just as a concept, there are these two things available. But what is important to understand is that from a security perspective, how these models are deployed, actually, right? So we'll look into it. I mean, if you look into this diagram, let's say you have your applications that's running in the customer VPC. You could go via internet gateway and reach the API endpoint. That is one way to go. Or let's say if you're outside AWS, you can also make a call via internet and reach this Bedrock endpoint. But our preferred way, and from a security perspective, we provide AWS private link or a VPC endpoint for Bedrock. Like how S3 as an endpoint, Bedrock also as an endpoint, and you will be able to go via that, actually, right? From a security perspective, this is what is recommended, right? So it uses private IP, it goes within Amazon network and all of the stuff that has happened. So There are these are the ways. Either you could use the internet or you could go via the private endpoint that AWS provides, right? Now let's shift the focus to the right hand side, the Amazon Bedrock service account, where the Bedrock is running actually, right? So this is the Amazon Bedrock service account. On the right hand side, if you see, you will see that model deployment account. So what it is means is that, let's say Anthropic is a third party model provider, right? We provide Claude models. So what we do it is that we get this Claude model from the third party model provider, and then we host that. When I say we, AWS hosts that model, and that account only AWS has access to it. Why I am emphasizing that point is that the third party model provider like Claude doesn't have access to that particular account or that to the particular machine. So there's no way they can get your data. And AWS also doesn't store your data anywhere in this, right? Not in the Bedrock service account or in the model deploy account. We don't store any of your data, right? Very, very important thing to kind of understand. If you're doing a provisioned capacity, again same thing. In the model deployer account, we create a capacity for you, and then we give you basically for you to use it actually, right? Same thing, we do it for training as well basically, right? And I don't want to go into too deep into it, but that's what we kind of do. Finally, very quickly, we also provide a feature called guardrails. Very, very important if you want to take some models into production. So what guardrail does it is that it sits between your model is over here, and the guardrail is present both when you are making a call to the prompt and when the output comes in. And then it actively, you could configure things like, for example, you can say that, so this is what it works, right? User makes an input, that is the prompt, and then now in the guardrail you can configure things like the topics that you don't want to discuss. For example, let's say you are a finance company, and basically you are a healthcare company, and somebody is asking a question about something related to finance. You don't want to discuss on those topics, right? So you can list out what are all the denied topics that you don't want to do. And then you could also set up filters around sensitive information and things like that, right? PII information and things like that. Some of the words that you don't want to use, that you can set it up. This guardrail will block it when if you see something in the input prompt, it will block it. And also in the output, if something comes, it will block it basically, right? So it acts both for your input and output. And this is very, very, very important for you. Basically, when you are taking a model into production and putting it in public, this is very, very important. Things around guardrails, very, very important for you to know about it and how to use it. I won't go into a lot of details because we are running out of time. But then again, this guardrail basically is just not for Bedrock. We made it available to other models as well. For example, if you're running a model in a SageMaker or you're running a model with OpenAI, if you want to use guardrail, we provide that as an API. It's called Apply Guardrail API, that you will be able to use it as well, actually, right? So with this, I'll stop here. So just to summarize, what we spoke about is that what are all the different types of generative AI applications that is available, how people are using it, and what are the controls, and what are some of the legal things that you need to look into it. And we also saw about what is how AWS is thinking about generative AI, and then we kind of went deep into some of the security aspects of Bedrock, actually, right? With that, I'll stop here, and happy to take questions actually.
Praveen, thank you so much. That was really a wonderful session. You touched upon the five different scopes. That was amazing, right from consumer app to enterprise app, pre-trained models, fine-tuned models. I mean, and then categorizing about the risk security aspect. It touched upon all levels of audience here, right? I specifically wanted to highlight a couple of things. No tech can help the model to unlearn what you have fed. So be cautious about what you're feeding into it. Avoid PII. That was amazing. And how well the third-party models are hosted in a dedicated AWS account to which even the third-party model providers nor the users have access. So those things really highlight about the security aspect, how it is ingrained in framework of AWS, right? That was really, really amazing. And I have lots of questions in the window. Let me bring a couple of them to your knowledge so that you can try
Sure.
to answer.
Mhm, mhm.
Starting with one, how do you handle the dynamic nature of generative AI models, where new data inputs can continually change the model's behavior? And how do you maintain compliance in such a fluid environment?
Yeah, couple of things. So one, these models are trained on, I said, a lot of data, and they have a time period when it is trained on, right? For example, if you take let's say a Claude 3.5 model, and you ask a question about the current Women's World T20 that is happening, it's not going to give you an answer because that model doesn't have that information actually, right? But there are ways to overcome that. That is where the concept of tools are available in large language models, where you can plug in, let's say, a Google search with your tool as a tool to a large language model, and then use it actually, right? Fine tuning is one way of bringing in new knowledge, but then again, how many times you will fine tune is again a question, right? Because that needs GPU capacity and things like that, right? So there are it's I mean, so if you want to bring in new data, there are ways to do it, like as I said, tools and other things, fine tuning. But then again, that is also an evolving field at this point of time actually.
Okay, thank you. And another question like, does Code Whisperer, I think now it's Amazon Q developer,
Q builders, yeah, Q for
typically
builders.
it allow usage of generated code for commercial reasons? I mean, the question is, does the Amazon Q developer lets you use the
you
code
could
for
you could
commercial?
use it, you could completely use it. There is no restriction on what I mean. You absolutely use it for commercial reasons, or if you're a company using it for developing for others, you will be absolutely able to use it. There's no issues or challenges around that.
Okay, there is an interesting question. How will AI help to drive revenue?
AI help to drive revenue. See, there are quite a few use cases, right? I mean, I'll talk about very quickly. I mean, I know we don't have a lot of time, so I'll quickly talk about few use cases that I have worked with customers. One, I work with a big bank, basically, who actually have they have implemented generative AI for their agents, basically, right? These are the agents who take your call when you call them, and they were able to drastically cut the number of or improve the productivity of the agents, basically, right? There's a huge improvement in productivity. I work with another insurance customer that's based out of Delhi. And so what they have done is that typically in insurance industry, underwriting is a very, very critical process actually, right? And that takes a lot of time, because based on that, they decide the premium that they give it to you, right? They've cut down the underwriting process that typically can take anywhere between 2 to 3 days to about 30 minutes actually, right? So that in again has a big impact on the revenue actually, right? So I mean, I can keep going on each and every sector, right? Again, in healthcare, there are a lot of applications around the images, right? Again, if you see the whole large language model space, it used to be only text, right? You put input as a text, get the output as a text, but now you could also, the multimodality concept is, the models are coming in, right? It's just not about the text. You can pass in images, you can pass in videos, you can also generate images, videos. So that again have a lot of implications around your content media industry. So there are multiple different use cases that can have a direct impact on your overall revenue, basically.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And what are the risks of using Gen AI in cybersecurity and how it can be protected against adversarial effects?
Yeah. So there are a couple of things, right? So one, protecting the generative AI applications is what we saw. I mean, if you're using generative AI, what are the things that you need to consider, right? But then, how can you use generative AI itself for basically for cybersecurity,
Cybersecurity.
right? If you take a lot of our, I mean, from Amazon perspective, if you take a lot of our services, for example, take the service called Macy. right? So which underlying uses AI, and now a lot of generative AI, it is used to identify your PII information that is there basically, right? That is one. And a lot of our WAF tools that is there predominantly underlying uses generative AI to find out what type of a request it is. It is some kind of a malicious request that is coming in. And then I have also seen a few of our ISP partners actually create WAF rules now by using generative AI. It can read the logs, and then it can automatically go and create those
Dynamically.
rules for you. Dynamically, it can create, right? Again, so if you take this generative AI, I mean, like the cybersecurity as a space, there are a lot of use cases around that you could use it, right? I mean, these are some of the few things that I have come across actually.
That's amazing. So, I mean, we have a majority of the audience here from, I mean, since we are also running the Cyber Security Awareness
Yes.
Month and more of
Yeah.
security
Comes
teams also here, I have yet another security related question. How
comes.
AI is being used to predict and prevent future cyber attacks through proactive threat intelligence? I think it's the same, similar answer what
Exactly
we spoke,
same,
right?
right? I'm not sure. I mean, I don't have an example on how do we predict, but definitely once that happens, how do you dynamically can prevent it? That's the use case that I spoke about, right? It can understand your threat that is coming in based on the logs. It can automatically create your WAF rules, for example, and then apply it, right? Even before a human kind of realizes it, you could have generative AI applications look into it and create it. That is one of the use cases like that. I've seen that quite a few use cases around that. But yeah, I mean, I can later share some of the other things that's being done as well, right? Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. So there's one other question. Oh, what are the key aspects of prompt engineering? If you want to
Good.
share a
So
couple of
yeah,
them.
so prompt engineering is I call that as interface to the models, right? So crafting a good prompt is very very important for you, right? So prompts at a very high level, you can just make you can say that, hey, this is my article, just summarize it and give it to me. That is one way. And then there is something called single shot or a multi-shot prompting, where you give an example and you direct your prompt in a certain direction that you want, basically, right? You say that, hey, this is an example, right? This is a question and this is an answer. Now I give a question and I expect the answer to be in that same format, actually, right? That is what we call it as a single shot or a multi-shot prompting. And another very, very important feature a lot of these models do is that you can give a role to the model. You can say that, hey, you are a financial analyst. Now give an answer. You think that you're a financial analyst and give an answer based on that, basically, right? Then you see that, then you start asking financial questions. You get a very, very good answers on the model, right? And again, another area, there's something called chain of thought, actually, right? So like how humans think. I mean, when you're given a problem as a human, we break down the problem into smaller steps. Now you could write your prompt so that you can make the model to break it down into smaller steps and then do it, right? Let's say there's some logical question that is there where you can ask the model to follow this chain of thought. Again, chain of thought can be extended into React and things like that. But these are all the concepts. I mean, at a very high level, these are all the concepts, and understanding how to write the prompt is extremely, extremely important to get a good output, actually.
That's amazing. Once again, thank you. Thank you so much, Praveen. I think you have a lot more questions keep coming in for the wonderful session. So, with the interest of time, let me conclude the session. A big thank you from the entire organizing committee for all the time you made your effort. I know you're traveling, you're in Delhi right now, still you made it. Thanks a lot. That really means a lot for all your support from you and AWS for Intuitive Cloud. We are always and always so proud and happy being associated as a successful AWS partner with you. Thank you so much. And
Thanks, everyone.
I would definitely like to end this session on a high note by thanking the entire organizing team, including Satak, Sunil, Danish, Ahmed, Naveen, Rashesh, and the entire art team for their hard work, not just for the webinar series, but the entire Cybersecurity Awareness Month. All your dedication is definitely appreciated to make this event a resounding success. Thank you so much for the audience, not just from Intuitive Cloud. Thanks to our CEO Jayakumar, who said, let's open up for the community and customers too. Thank you, each and everyone, for making this. Thank you, Praveen, once again. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Bye.
Bye.